In this video, you will learn about a genocide that you have probably never heard of. I will get to the when, where, how, by whom, and why. But first, the elephant in the room. Why doesn't mainstream media cover the Venezuelan genocide? The answer is because it's committed by a communist regime. And what has that got to do with it, you ask? Well, three things. First, almost all the NGOs reporting on human rights violations in the Americas are linked to a communist regime, Cuba. Second, the United Nations has been rendered useless since the perpetrator regimes have seats on the Human Rights Council. And third, many journalists have a leftist bias that make them judge communist dictatorships with another yardstick than they use for right-wing dictatorships. Sadly, they seem to accept human rights violations against people that they perceive as more privileged, in this case, the white middle class. This is the same social phenomenon that allowed Hitler to turn the Germans against the Jews. Communism and Nazism are two sides of the same coin. So, what is this Venezuelan genocide? First, the background. In late 2012, the Cuban regime, who de facto controls Venezuela, killed the Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez in order to replace him with their hand-picked man, Nicolás Maduro. They also wanted to outmaneuver Diosdado Cabello, the head of the military cocaine cartel, El Cartel de los Soles. But Cabello outsmarted them and came out stronger than before. The Venezuelan people understood that Hugo Chavez had committed election fraud and that Chavez was dead, although Maduro claimed that he was still alive. So protests against Cuba erupted in January 2013 when Maduro started to govern in Chavez's name. Even though the regime eventually admitted that Chavez was dead and went to new elections, the election fraud continued, and so did the protests. For months, the protests were simple marches that ended peacefully. But in late November, a peaceful march was met with violence by regime supporters. By February 2014, the peaceful marches were met with gunfire, killing people by the dozens. This caused the protests to intensify and the repression to worsen. One state in Venezuela was liberated from the regime for a month, expelling the repressive forces. But the regime took in 60,000 Cuban soldiers to regain control. This put a damper on the protests, but the fight never died. This is where the genocide comes in. By the summer of 2015, the regime had implemented the laws of a Holodomor, genocide by starvation. This is the exact same strategy that Stalin used in Ukraine in 1932, and it consists of three key laws. First, confiscate food and prevent the access to it. Second, prohibit the transportation of food so that new food cannot be brought in from outside. And third, provide regime supporters with food, but not more than they themselves need so that they cannot share. Starvation takes time, but eventually our intelligence showed that it had killed 200,000 children. The UN has later reported the range to 200,000 to 300,000 dead. Our estimation for the development of this regime-created hunger catastrophe was that 5 million would starve to death within 18 months, which coincidentally is in the same order of magnitude as the historic Holodomor in Ukraine. As a result, in early 2018, we called off the fight in order to save these lives. Better live to fight another day and not end up silenced forever in the ground like the Ukrainians. The fighting spirit was still on top, so the decision was unpopular. I personally assume full responsibility for it. Perhaps the regime would have fallen when the deaths would have made the headlines around the world, but there is no guarantee. The only guarantee was that millions would die, as I saw it. I could not live with that, so I called it off. You see, the Venezuelan resistance listened to me. Before calling it off, I had tried to obtain help from countries that say they are for freedom and human rights, like the US where I lived and Sweden where I was born, but to no avail. In the case of Sweden, I later found out when reading a book by a retired Swedish intelligence officer that the foreign minister at the time was an ideological ally of the Venezuelan dictatorship, so it was completely futile to ask for help there. There were too many countries helping the narco-tyranny in Caracas. That is why I could not avoid the conclusion that continued fight would have meant volunteering for a genocide. Within the stipulated 18 months, 5 million people had fled, confirming the estimate of how many were not getting enough food to survive. By now, the number of refugees has increased to 8 million. As for the foreign aid, some aid did indeed arrive, but only after 12 months, when there would already have been over 1 million dead if people hadn't fled. Also, the regime did not allow the help to enter the country, and the rest of the world did not force them. So, not a single grain of rice or pill of medicine arrived. You see, they were also doing a genocide by withholding life-saving medicine, especially against the so prevalent tropical diseases. Our coordinator in Caracas died for lack of a simple medicine that is on the UN essential list. So now you know what the Venezuelan genocide is. Remember that genocide also includes ethnic cleansing. So all those who survived by fleeing are still victims of the genocide by being victims of ethnic cleansing. The total number of victims is thus in the order of 8 million, but thankfully, most of them are still alive, in exile, and will hopefully be able to return home again soon. They just need help in overthrowing the genocidal terrorist regime that is holding their country hostage. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you do that, you are helping the Venezuelan people. And remember, whatever we do for them, we do for all of humankind. Now it's Venezuela. 80 years ago, it was Germany. Next time, it might be your country. We have to stand up for human rights in all parts of the world, all the time. Thank you.